Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm here with my man Josh Sigler, Vice President of Geology at XCL Resources. Josh, I'm pumped to have you on the show. First and foremost, how's everything in your world? It's a beautiful Friday here in Houston, buddy.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Justin. You're
Yeah.
absolutely right. Beautiful Friday here. I think first time I haven't had the air conditioning on the drive to work in the Space City weather guys tell me 4 months.
Yep.
No, great day here. Just living the dream. Drilling some of the best wells in the United States, and here to talk with you about it today.
That's what I'm talking about, man. Real quick though, on the weather front, it's so we had like 4 months of 100-degree weather, it felt like. Then we got dumped on for 2 days straight. We got our water fix, and now it's beautiful. It was like 70 this morning, a little brisk, if I might say. But I see, because when you first got on here, I noticed in the background there, I was like, well, you're close to a window. I got to give a big shout out to XCL Resources. I came and visited Taylor and a couple folks there, over the last couple of years, just for lunch
Yeah,
and stuff. And I love your guys' location. Your office is super cool. Like, what's the 1-2 punch on the culture at XCL? Because you guys are kind of unique in a certain way. And then after that, we'll get into some other fun stuff.
yeah. I think as you've gathered, our office is a bit of an outgrowth of our culture. Um, we're certainly a young company. As somebody who just turned 40, I think I'm not positive. These are the sorts of statistics HR doesn't really share, but I might be in the top quartile of age. Um, but we're a young company, and ultimately, our leadership, when they formed the company, they recognized that we didn't have to have a stuffed shirt, you know, suit and tie culture to have a spectacular company. And so one of the things they wanted was somewhere that was a office space that really appealed to people wanting to be in the office, not having to fight a big bad commute, kind of having something walkable. And so initially, our first office, when it was just like 10 of us, we were above the snooze in Montrose.
Oh,
And it
what?
was it was a heck of a location. I think you can look at some police reports and find that one of our employees actually was a witness to a shooting there.
Oh,
We ate lots of snooze breakfast. It was a great spot, but as we acquired our asset and got bigger, they just found that we needed a little bit something more. And being here at MKT in the Heights is it's a great location, but it's super informal is really the word I want to use, but we know when to turn the formal on when we need to.
yeah.
It's just really finding that balance in who we are as people and not forcing everybody into a different box. And so
Yeah.
it's a really cool culture we have here. Everybody's really relaxed, really interested in cross pollination, talking across disciplines, and really letting the data drive us on the decisions we make, anywhere from acquiring our asset to looking at what drilling fluids we use, looking at where we're going to drill our next wells. We like to pride ourselves on not being really emotionally tied to the data or to the decision making, and really
Mhm.
following what the best decisions are for all of us.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I feel like, especially over time, our industry is, I would say, on a headcount sort of viewpoint, it's slowly shrinking. I mean, you look at rig count over time, the peaks and valleys are pretty drastic, but every time we peak, the rig count is less and less. And so again, I live in the drilling operations world, so that's
Yeah,
kind of the lens I look through. It gets smaller and smaller. And I say that because acquiring talent is often very challenging, and it still is. And I think it'll continue to get even more challenging. But having companies such as yourselves, like if I was a young kid graduating college, and whether it was like a chemical or mechanical engineering degree or geology or geoscience, something science related, and I saw a company like XCL, or wait, maybe my buddy worked there and he brought me into the office, I'd be like, man, this place looks like I'd love to work here. So I commend you guys for kind of having that foresight, is like, hey, if we want to continue to attract the right people that fit our culture, we can't be, just like we've always been, as an oil and gas industry. And so again, I commend your leadership, because I would imagine it starts at the top, and then you just kind of tack onto it. But that was something that I've always kind of recognized. And even just the people, they all have a very just a very down to earth, friendly, work hard, play hard type mentality. And so again, I just thought that's really neat, and something that you guys should, definitely need to double down on, which it sounds like you have. So
yeah,
again,
yeah. And I think as you're recognizing, the other thing we pride ourselves on is listening to everybody. Everybody's part of the team, and so that empowerment, that bringing on new people, bringing on young people who are sharp, frankly, right? Like maybe not everyone's not as experienced as others, but they're sharp. They bring new ideas. They bring new ways of thinking. Incorporating that, understanding that they have a different perspective. I think that's something that I like to think is a little bit of some transition we're going to go through as an
Yeah.
industry as we kind of are getting slimmer and our demographics get a little bit different. Some of those hog laws that we had before kind of are, some of them are great, but some of them were more open to challenging. And I think that's something that our leadership has made sure we think about how we make our decisions in that way, all the way down to like, hey, how do we make sure we're all enjoying what we do together, and being part of that team? Uh,
Yeah.
it's realistically, it's kind of funny. The team I work with, our team of geologists, we all talk about how like, man, it's kind of the best shop we've ever been at, and it's just fun. That's
Yeah.
which is the best part.
It reminds me of Ray Dalio. He has the idea of meritocracy, and it's basically a system where the idea is like the best decision making system. Well, the idea of meritocracy is the best decision making system because it allows for the best ideas to rise to the top, regardless of where they come from or who brings them to the table. But to your point, like everyone has a voice, and it just kind of reminded me of that because that's really something that helps increase just the health of the business, and also adds to the unique culture and a culture that people want to be a part of, right? Because a lot of times it's like unless like the executives or upper management talk about it, everyone else is just kind of being told what to do. But if you're in a position where you can create value, even in a role that is not executive or management, again, some of the best ideas come from folks who or just don't know any better, and they say something and you're like, I would have never thought of that, but that's actually kind of unique. And so having that level of open-mindedness to actually accept ideas from everybody, again, it's so different than what I've been used to over the years.
Yeah, I can remember some of the first meetings. You know, so Gray, our CEO, is a spectacular leader, as well as Blake, our COO, and Eric, our chief technical officer. But Gray, in a conversation once early on, most of us come from public companies and more structured companies where hey, don't say that to the CEO unless you've said it to your manager and your manager's kind of cleared it up the line. And so a lot of folks moved up in the world and certainly closer to the CEO. And so early on, even he'd be like, I just don't understand why people won't speak their mind to the CEO. Like, what's going on here? And we're like, great. Like, everybody's got to readjust to this culture. Some of us have been here a year, we're a lot more used to it, but give people time, and it permeates here. And
Yeah.
as you said, it really drives that merit-based decision making, drives people to bring up good ideas in moments rather than just like pocket them and wait till they've cleared it all the way up the line.
Exactly. No, that's super cool. Well, I'm going to take a quick pivot here. Again, you're in the geology side of things, and someone like myself, I struggled with geology in school. I remember doing my petroleum engineering tech up in Canada, and it was always so abstract to me. And I was like, who in the world would ever want to be in geology? And so I'm curious, like, when did you realize you wanted to pursue a career in geology?
Yeah, it's actually that's a funny question because I started college in Ohio, and I started with a computer science degree, and I got through my first year. I really liked what I did, very honestly. Like, I love programs, still do a lot of it now. But I sat in a basement for like 2 semesters, and it was just like, is this my life? Like, am I really gonna like, as a college kid, not thinking way out in time, but just like, am I gonna spend the next 4 years like just sitting in a basement? Like, that's not really what I want to do.
Yeah.
And so then I was like, well, who who gets to go play outside a lot? I was like, I'll tell you who it is. It's those geologists. And so I took your basic rocks for jocks. Loved it, and really saw that as I took more classes, saw that geology it's really there are some things that are very creative. We do a lot of arm waving, but at the same time, we steal from everybody. People talk about being a geochemist or a geophysicist, or we might call it a paleontologist, but it's a geobiologist, right? And so we steal a bunch of science and then we apply it directly to things we see. And so just going through that process of learning how to take something that it's kind of an abstract concept. How do these grains sort out, and how does that affect the way that we see different stacking patterns in outcrop to log? It just really led me to realize that I get to do one of the greatest detective jobs in the world, with some of the hardest problems in the world, because we never get, if I want to use that detective analogy, we never see who did the crime, right? Never ever, right? Like that happened millions of years ago. We got to piece that all together from all the forensic evidence we can. And so I consider myself lucky. I went to undergrad in Ohio, then went to University of Wyoming for my master's degree. Got an awesome master's experience going out looking at rocks, doing metamorphic petrology, like formation of the earliest portions of North America. Rocks that are 1.7 billion years old. Zero application to oil and gas. Like if I did that degree again today, I would end up as a lithium mining geologist for sure. But at the time, that wasn't what people were hiring for. I was fortunate enough that at that moment, Exxon was hiring. Really loved my technology skills, so I kind of got into the industry doing technology and geology integration.
Yeah.
Found that at Exxon that was a little more structured than I wanted, and so I ended up jumping ship, leaving for a private equity shop, Wild Horse Resources.
That's right.
Fell in love with how fast you learn from the onshore game. At Exxon, I was working offshore, a lot of deep water projects where maybe we drill a well a year. And it just moved too slow for me. You'll notice that at moments through this conversation, I probably am trying to keep my natural inclination to talk fast, move fast, reeled in.
It's okay. Be yourself, man. That's what it's all about.
But the onshore game was exactly that, right? You go drill a well, where you come up with a scientific hypothesis. You go drill a well. You're either right or you're wrong. So if you're right, you apply it again for more success. If you're wrong, you learn and make it better. And I just fell in love with doing that. And Wild Horse was a great gig as well. We built up a lot of great assets there. But when this opportunity came along to work at a really exciting young shop, kind of move forward in my career, this was kind of a no-brainer. This has been the most fun that I've had going. And the Uinta wasn't even anywhere on the radar when we formed the company, but once we found it, it was kind of like that scene in Step Brothers, where like, did we just become best friends? Did we go do karate in the garage?
Right? Yeah, dude, that's so funny. So when XCL was first formed, where were your assets based then, or where was the focus?
Our early focus was really looking and thinking about where are there undervalued assets. Where can we go apply the most modern of technologies in the horizontal game? The people haven't been doing that. And I won't lie, it's not a thing we don't talk about being like a shop exactly like Kraken, but Kraken is a great example of somebody that we held up in high regard. And honestly, we started by looking in the Bakken similarly. We thought that there was a lot of areas where people hadn't applied modern technologies. A lot of operators stuck in the 300 pound per foot frac jobs, 600 pound per foot. And so we kind of hoped we would find undervalued assets there. Unfortunately, nobody really undervalued their assets. We can all talk. We can agree to disagree with some folks on whether they fairly valued their assets or overvalued their assets. But we just never made any headway making any acquisitions there. And so then we took the search far and wide, looked across the United States, and like I said, we got into we bought our Uinta asset from a shop who did a great job delineating our Uinta asset, Axia Energy. We stepped into their data room and we were just like, is this real? Like this is unbelievable. The rock is unbelievable. The way these guys have lined it out in terms of delineating the 5 different benches they had delineated and the 2 others they had tested that had showed strong potential. It just looked like the perfect asset that could be taken straight to development, but it had one little X against it that I think is kind of the long-standing historical issue, and it's what do you do with a crude that is a wax at room temperature?
And so for those listening on podcasts, click the YouTube link, which I'll have in the show notes, because Josh has a really cool little demonstration. He's got a vial with some oil in there. And so if you don't get a chance to get on YouTube, describe what it looks like and how thick it is. And especially at room temperature, which I imagine is like around 70, 75 in your office, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Fortunately, with the cooler weather, the air conditioning is not blasting. We're in the 70s, not 60s in my office. But right now I'm holding a jar of our yellow wax, which literally, let's see if looks a lot like Carmex at surface.
It does, yeah.
It's like spot on to Carmex. I'm not going to smear it on my lips, but it's pretty darn similar to it. It's a kind of a lipid-rich crude that comes from the rocks of the Uinta, or a lacustrine or lake environment instead of a marine environment like most unconventional source rocks. And so I could really go deep, JG, but you don't want to hear the geochemistry on this. Suffice to say that it just creates a much different crude that's really waxy. So it's still a light crude. You know, I've got a yellow wax that's a 42 API. And probably the heaviest stuff we produce is more like what we would call our black wax, like a 36 API. Still really light crude, but with a really incredible heavy end. That's really it's a domestic sweet light crude with a lot of heavies that ultimately has historically really only been refined in the Salt Lake City market. And so that was the hang up for I think a lot of people looking at this asset when we bought it, is that it had to be refined in Salt Lake City. Well, our predecessors had kind of proven that didn't have to be true, that they'd started railing some to the Gulf Coast. And so now we've taken that thesis a little bit further, and probably about at least a third, if not more, of our crude comes down to the Gulf Coast, and refiners are finding that they really like it down here. Other companies are doing the same thing, and that's really enabled the next leg of growth in the Uinta Basin. And I'd say that's kind of back to why was it undervalued? People hadn't thought about unique solutions, hadn't thought about applying different technologies to, which in this case is as simple as a rail car to the Uinta. But once you start thinking outside the box, once you start thinking of different solutions, the world's your oyster.
So I want to double click on that idea. So how does the Uinta story fit into the larger narrative of energy exploration and production here in the US?
Yeah, I mean, very admittedly, today we're still a pretty small player. If you look at, I bantered with you on LinkedIn a little bit about what our growth would look like on the EIA charts. The Uinta still today produces, last reliable number is about 6 months ago when you look at public data, but we've grown now from peaks, or really the valley right around COVID. We were producing 60,000 barrels a day. We've grown now to about 120,000 in April. It's probably more than that today. Just don't have the public numbers in to kind of compare where everybody's at. Sure. But when you look at that, that's a bit of a small play. But at the same time, when you look at what the U.S. market is producing today, it's a crude that's well north of 40 API. It's jet fuel, right? And so refiners are really having to blend and mix that hydrocarbon with something else. And so we like to think of what we have as the perfect complement to the rest of what the North America is doing. Something that can add that heavy end and really give you a feedstock that adds more lubes, and a lot of and actually kind of step in. We're not by any means a volumetric replacement for this, but one of the products that the U.S. doesn't import crude from Russia, but it imports some refined products that end up as feedstocks. This is a pretty great replacement for it. So we like to think we offer a pretty great replacement for some, whether it's distillates or VGO feedstocks, or other heavy crudes that come from places that have turmoil. Utah's a great market. They're super. We found that it's a community, which is the other kind of cool thing. Is it they know that they're kind of an underloved basin or crude producing state, and so they're just great to work with. And we find that honestly they're a really exceptional energy state to work with. And we can dive down that rabbit hole later. But on the crude front, it's been great just building something that has seen historical production, but not nearly the application of technology that we've seen. And you almost end up in kind of a leapfrogging moment. Talk about technologies like cell phones hitting Africa instead of landlines. We get to skip a lot of the technological moments that happened along the way to the true high power hydraulic fracking that we see in the modern shale industry, and we kind of skip straight to that technology, straight to development concepts that allow us to put 10, 12 well cube, 15 well cubes in the ground in a DSU by learning from some of what we've seen in other basins.
Wow. No, that's fascinating. And I didn't really realize. So I interviewed Ted Cross from Novi Labs. He's a geologist as well. And we were bantering about the Uinta Basin as well. And he was quite bullish on it too. And so he kind of dove into it a little bit, but not to the level that you have, obviously you working in it right now. But he was kind of the first people to tell me about it. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And now hearing what you have to say, especially on the kind of the feedstock and petrochem side, it just kind of adds another element to our energy security, which is huge, right? Like that's what we really should be thriving for. And so, natural question is, everyone and their dog wants to be part of the Permian Basin. And so I'm curious if you could just do a quick comparison of the Uinta versus Delaware Basin well productivity. And I mean, again, the Delaware is often cited as a benchmark for well productivity. Yeah. So how does the Uinta stack up against it, both in terms of yield and efficiency?
Yeah. I think yield and efficiency, I might not have great statistics on that, but realistically,
whatever your knowledge base.
No, my perfect statistic is if you look at 30 months of production, your core counties of the Delaware, your Eddy, Lee, down into Winkler and Love a little bit, those wells will produce between 300,000 and 350,000 barrels of oil in that first 30 months. Okay. Uinta Rock does the same thing. We can compete blow for blow with the Permian in the core of our acreage and the core of the Permian. And so we've got some of the best rock there. We also cool thing about our story is that's just what we call the lower cube. We have that's kind of the lowest portions of the Green River, the deepest part of the lake. As you go a little shallower in the lake, we've tested some wells and continue to drive our understanding of what we call our upper cube, and those wells look a lot more like the Midland Basin. And so we kind of have stack pay that kind of gives us, something that can really give really competitive economics. The other thing about we have really similar productivity to the Permian. We might have a little higher differential. We have to rail our crude. It is in fact hard to move stuff that is wax relative to jet fuel that can go in a pipeline. But our well cost is significantly lower as well. So when you kind of net it out and look at what your differential is across a barrel, we're not that far off. We're pretty darn close, frankly, to what the Delaware looks like. And so we think that's one of the coolest things about this story is that we kind of fly under the radar a little bit, and that's as Ted has noted in some of his musings on the internet. It's one of the reasons that you see we're one of the few basins that's truly growing. Back to the EIA numbers, this year we passed what the EIA tight oil would call I believe we've passed the Woodford and the Austin Chalk on their graphs in terms of how much oil we produce a day. So next up is Oklahoma, Mississippi, and so we're coming for them, and that's obviously just an oil metric. They
Got
produce a
it.
lot more gas than we do, which is a neat differentiating factor to ours. We're pretty much all oil. Low GOR crude, black oil.
Is there a
So to
lot of
speak.
water that comes with your guys' production?
No, we're like it's a lot, not nearly. We're probably like somewhere between a 1-to-1 water oil ratio, maybe a up to 2-to-1. So if you're a water cut guy, 50% water cut to 60% in our core intervals. So
Wow.
much different than certainly the large portions of the Delaware.
Yeah. So with that being said, I mean, there's all, I would imagine there's other outlying factors that come into effect that would sort of position itself as not being as attractive perhaps to investors. But like, why hasn't it taken off more than it has?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big part of it is certainly the early innings of the horizontal story.
Oh,
We're
okay.
starting to talk about it. One thing that we've watched for a long time as a player in the Uinta Basin is the one of the biggest and best acreage positions in the Uinta Basin is held by Ovintiv, formerly Newfield, and they
Yeah.
kind of sat on it for a while. I think they viewed it as kind of this like free kicker they got when they bought their scoop stack acreage from Newfield. That the Uinta was just a free kicker.
Hmm.
And finally, in the last 2 years, like literally, they said nothing about it in their press releases for years.
Yeah.
2 years ago, you could see they finally put it on the map in their 10K statement. And
Okay.
then last year, they finally said, "Oh, hey, between the Uinta and the Bakken, we're gonna devote a significant amount of capital." Then they divested their Bakken and are still telling the street that they're gonna run they're gonna invest that capital in the Uinta. They have 2 rigs running now. So I think it's starting to happen. I think the other question always is a bit of well, how fast can something like that grow? How big can it scale?
Yeah.
And that's certainly a good question. But we tend to be a bit more on we're just kind of capitalists, right? Where we view it as like, let's build the market as the market built, or let's build the laws of supply and demand into this, right? As
Yeah.
we'll build some supply, that'll probably grow some demand. As demand grows, then you'll see bigger investment in capital. I also think it's just off the radar. People are focused on the Permian. One of the statistics I really like is if you look in 2019, about 350,000 acres in the Uinta had a horizontal covering it. If you take the outline of everything, if you look today, we've got about 500,000 or 500,000 acres that have covered. So in those 5 years, we've almost increased by 50% the area that people are realizing horizontals can be drilled across. And the oil window in the Uinta is really more like 1.5 million acres. So we've only touched a third of the Uinta for what can you really do there for horizontal potential. And so there's still, honestly, I kind of view it as it's still really early innings.
Okay.
And that's the cool part about the Uinta story is there's just so much more to put together. Back to your why do I love being a geologist? It's also one of the coolest places in the world where you can go put a drill bit in the ground, go drill a Uteland Butte well. And if you got some questions, you can go drive, 20, 15 miles south and go look at an outcrop of it on the rim of the basin and start to build your story all the way from the outcrops you see at the edge of the basin down into the subsurface. And realistically, as a basin with not a lot of players in it, we find it's incumbent on ourselves to do that science, understand where we need to go next after this. So we just get to do some of the coolest fundamental science, go work with awesome partners at the Utah Geologic Survey looking at core, the USGS looking at core there in their Denver facility. We just get to do a lot of cool things
Yeah.
playing geologist, man.
No kidding. So you mentioned like being kind of in the early stages of development, just in general for the Uinta Basin. There's Eagle Ford and Permian and stuff. There's a lot of discussion around tier 2 inventory, and a lot of the best wells have already been drilled. Is that not? I mean, I'm assuming
No,
it's not the case with you
no.
guys.
There's still, yeah. I mean, I think certainly we would argue we're drilling some really awesome rocks that are part of that core today. And Ovintiv is doing similar. the Uinta Wax guys also, Javelin. People are active on that. But it's also, I mean, we're, just like any basin, people are high grading what they drill for the best results. But that's also, we're all chasing what today I'd say the high productivity wells. There's
Yeah.
a whole nother leg of exploration and development that looks a lot more like the Midland in my mind. Not, and this is not to dog the Midland, but to say that those wells, the Midland wells, aren't Delaware wells, right? But they're still spectacularly economic because they're cheaper to drill. You
Yeah.
still get great rates. You get great early time production from them. And I think, this is definitely a biased opinion, but I think there's a lot more room for that Midland type leg to be discovered in the Uinta Basin, while all of us are focused on the Delaware today, our Delaware analog today.
Right. Okay. So I want to kind of zoom in on XCL's development and basin production growth. I mean, you guys have been a pivotal player in growth, especially at a time where arguably other basins seem to be stagnating in some ways. So I'm curious, what are some of the strategies behind this counter-cyclical performance that you guys have realized?
Yeah, I mean, I think as you kind of noted, it all starts with the rock, right? Like we kind of work from a position where our we have a really well delineated position that allows us to kind of that's ripe for development mode. So we've just been going in and doing what shale oil said it would do for decades. We go in and we just mow the lawn. We just lay down cubes, and
Yeah.
we intelligently try to design those cubes to test different concepts each time we're drilling one. So one part that's always hard with full development mode is implementing learnings while you're doing things on the fly, right? And so anyone who go look at our stuff can see we admittedly in our first couple cubes we went wide. We wanted to make sure we won, got the production we could, that we expected, and we did. And we've been testing tighter. We've been testing different spacing concepts, but we do that all in kind of a really programmatic way to understand. Hey, okay, if we tweak the frac, will that be the only? We want that to be the only driver on the change we see. Or if we tweak the spacing, that's going to be what we see. If we tweak the frac chemicals, is that something that's going to drive things? We're just trying to test as we go, but doing it in a really prudent way that kind of keeps us obviously got to stay financially healthy and sound as we do all that.
Yeah.
And I think the proof is in the pudding as you see us go from a couple of years ago, we were at 12,000 barrels of oil today and hitting. I don't know if it's fully on the public data yet, but we're right around 50,000 barrels of oil today. So
Awesome.
great growth and really it's just a cool story to be part of while you get to do the good work of driving some of the financial engines of our country through
Yeah.
increasing production while getting to be a scientist. It's
Yeah,
it's
man.
awesome, man.
Doing what you love and making an
Yeah,
impact, right?
yeah,
You mentioned something that was pretty cool earlier about technical, sort of technology leapfrogging. And so I'm curious, can you describe some of the technical or technological innovations that Uinta or maybe XCL is adopting that perhaps other basins have missed
yeah.
out on or aren't really considering?
Well, I don't want to like say anybody's missing out on or not considering, but like we're just and I know a lot of this for folks who will listen sounds like old hat in some ways, but like we're just trying to think through things logically on looking at what we implement. And honestly, some of it's even kind of down to the level of what we do to have a positive environmental impact. We make smart decisions just based on what seems to make sense for us. Like our frac crew is one of a handful, we think, of double barrel dual fuel frac crews in the United States. So
Oh, wow.
both our rigs and our frac crew use as much natural gas as they can run on.
Okay.
And so that certainly has a positive impact on our emissions footprint. But realistically, it's just environmentally or it's economically sound for us. The amount of diesel we don't burn. If I really wish I had the statistics of if we were driving somewhere in an F-250 diesel, how many miles we could go, but I haven't done the math on that. But suffice to say, we just save a lot of diesel. Don't use that. So moving to some of those technologies, being very forward thinking with how we use SCADA systems and monitoring our production, thinking through how we can better identify production trends through those to identify what we need to do faster and earlier. We use as much produced water as we can. Some days it'll be 100% of our frac is produced water, which is a slight. We're very fortunate that we have some of the cleanest produced water in the United States because we're a lake instead of a marine system. But
Okay.
yep, it's a different game than cleaning up Bakken water or cleaning up Permian water, but we
Right.
still do it. And
Wow.
partially that's something that we like to think is certainly beneficial to not having to inject that wastewater back underground into other reservoirs. But it also makes sense for us. We don't have to buy fresh water to do that.
No, that's
just
those are some huge nuggets. I mean, so not only is your technology advancements impacting productivity, but you're also dramatically impacting sustainability and how you guys operate, which kind of ties in, and again, I know a lot of the oil and gas folks are tired of hearing ESG, but the reality is I think operators have really adopted a lot of great technologies and just initiatives to help produce in a more sustainable manner that really positively impact the environment.
Yeah.
And so, with regards to ESG leadership within Utah, I would imagine it's becoming increasingly critical in the energy sector. So, I mean, is there anything else that, XCL is doing to be a practical leader in ESG, particularly within like the Utah community or anything to that nature?
Yeah. First and foremost, let me talk up the Utah community in general. Utah, I think, is really a great forward-thinking state in terms of how they're thinking through what you can do in terms of what I would call a common sense, everything, including the kitchen sink approach to the energy transition. Right.
Yeah.
To back up a second, I think I'm a bit on the practical side of the energy transition is coming. Like I think we all need to embrace the fact that it is happening, but we do need to do it in a practical way. And so, the world still needs hydrocarbons. But Utah is certainly, as a community, they're working on the Forge project to try to produce geothermal energy out of the state. You've got Fervo doing a private endeavor right next to there to do the exact same thing, trying to work on producing geothermal energy. The state is doing a great study with the DOE on carbon capture on the east side of the Uinta Basin, working to see how we can store CO2 there. You've got the ACES Delta project that Chevron just became a major player in, storing electrolyzed hydrogen in salt caverns. As a community, Utah is really trying to think, be very thoughtful and be a real leader in what they do. And so we're, as now the largest oil and gas producer in the state of Utah, we're trying to do our part. I think it starts at the common sense level, right? I think in so many ways people get kind of caught up in resisting change just because it's that it's being forced upon them to some degree. But at the end of the day, like a lot of the stuff we're doing is the common sense stuff, right?
Right.
Like we can switch to natural gas instead of diesel. Like we have that in abundance. It makes sense to do that. Using our water for frac makes sense to do that. And I think those first steps tend to lead to more positive steps, right? Let's start there and then move on from there. I think we're not involved in a lot of those other big projects I've mentioned in the state of Utah, but we keep an eye on them because we want to, and I think that's going to be one of the critical themes to the energy transition is really helping companies such as ourselves that are capitalistic in nature. We want to see that we can make a return on the investments we make. We need to see that. We're not Chevron. We're not Exxon. We can't invest in CCUS for what's going to happen in 10 years. We kind of need to see that positive rate of return in a realistic time horizon. And so I think this is one area where I don't have the perfect answers. What's the right I always think that you got to kind of work with the carrot instead of the stick, because people resist the stick, they don't resist the carrot nearly as much.
I
But
like that. Yeah.
what's the right stick, and hopefully more carrot, to get the world of private equity, the world of folks that say, hey, the money's just not there today on investing in solar. It's not there today in investing in doing a CCUS project. How do we create those financial structures? That's one thing I think is really awesome about your podcast, is the way you cover that gamut of different things. So I'd almost be interested to hear what you think about how does an operator such as ourselves move beyond that like we're making the obvious steps. What's the next step there?
Man, to be honest, I think it's, I mean, it might sound very broad, but I think it's proper messaging. I think the way we've communicated our position and strategy and dependency has been like, we have all the leverage. So, it's us against them. And it's always been a tug of war versus
Yeah.
coming at it in a kind, empathetic way. And really, again, we have some very unique voices within the energy industry. We have Chris Wright, we have Alex Epstein, we have Toby Rice up in the Northeast, but we don't have someone like an Elon Musk, or someone that, I mean, again, I respect anyone out there who's trying to create the right message and communicate to people that's like, hey, you need us, and we're going to do everything we can to produce, and so on and so forth. But a lot of it, when you talk to people who have opposing views, they look at those folks as still like, we're being told what to do and we're all a bunch of idiots. Like, they're not, a lot of times they're not gaining much influence, which again, they're obviously doing something right because they're in the headlines every day. But at the end of the day, I think it's a messaging, and I think it takes people like you and I from within who are in the weeds, educating people that aren't on executive boards, who have all the money. Because at the end of the day, it's, we're going to be voting with our dollars, and we need to be educating those people who are buying everyday goods, who are spending money to allow them to have the information to help make better decisions just on a daily basis. And then hopefully we can educate the younger generation.
Yeah.
I think that's critical as well. And so it might be a different answer than you were expecting, but that to me is extremely important.
It's right in line with the way I like to think of it. I think so. I think it is so us against them sort of mentality in the way I view it, and others may view it differently. But like when you just look at, I love the goal of, hey, can we produce hydrogen and start to slipstream hydrogen into methane and do and kind of decrease emissions through those sorts of initiatives, and doing some of that stuff in incremental ways, like just creating great tangible short-term goals that will lead to the long-term goals feels like something that I think is a little bit missing. And creating just switching to hydrogen as a source for any number of different green projects. But can we do something transitional? Can we use methane in between, right? Can we electrolyze from methane instead of electrolyzing from water, and figure out what we do with obviously that comes with emissions, but figuring out what we do with those emissions first. I think there's steps along the way that can get us to goals faster if we are willing to accept that there's going to be a transitory phase, not just we're gonna shut the lights out on hydrocarbons.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, Josh, I think it's important for us and anyone who has a voice or some bit of following, and I hate to use the word following, but is to like really educate on the fundamentals of supply and demand.
Yeah.
The reality is if again, it sounds, I've said this for a long time, is like, if we want to reduce the dependency of oil and gas, we need to stop consuming so much shit, because it's like a lot of it's industrial, and a lot of it is the emissions brought on by logistics coming from overseas. I mean, look at what we've done in the US is we've had so much cheap money to where people were able to buy so much stuff that originated in China. So you have planes and boats and everything else bringing all these goodies like you see in the
Yeah.
background
Oh,
here.
yeah, yeah.
So it's but like communicating that in like a kind and again, I'm not
Yeah.
trying like we have to be soft, but the
Yeah.
reality is like the people that are in their 30s and 20s and even teens, they consume information a lot differently than say you or I did growing up. And so it's like just trying to slowly educate. And I remember when I was in 2010, I got shipped from Calgary to Pittsburgh when the Marcellus Shale was kicking off. And I'll never forget, I was getting a haircut, and I was the only person in the salon getting a haircut. And right away, the lady recognized my Canadian accent. She's like, "Oh, you must be from like you sound like you're Canadian or something." I said, "Yeah." And she's like, "Oh, what are you doing here?" And so I'm in energy because I was so embarrassed to say I was in oil and gas because everyone like told me that I was locals. Like, don't tell anyone you're in oil and gas because they think you're ruining the environment. And I was like, okay, like I'm okay. So I told her an energy and she's like, "Oh, what do you work for?" And she thought it was like a utility company. I was like, "No, I'm actually here with so-and-so and we're working for companies like Chesapeake and this and that." She's like, "Oh, are you a fracker?" And I was like, "No, like I work on the drilling side." And anyway, to make a long story short, you could tell the tone was like, "Oh, well, you're here to like take our jobs, to ruin the environment so you can just make as much money as you possibly can." And I tried to educate her and say, "Well, the reality is like I don't want to live in Pittsburgh. I would much rather train your local people so I can either go back to Canada or somewhere else that I'd rather work." And I said, all these folks and all these boys from Texas coming up here working, I guarantee you they would rather go back to Texas and work in the Eagle where they're like 2 hours from home, not having to drive all the way up here. So I said, I promise you, your community is probably going to benefit like considerably from us being up here. And I said, look around. Who's in here? And she's like, well, you are. I was like, yeah. So I'm spending money at your establishment to help keep you in business. So I said, the more people that come here to work to help produce natural gas for your homes and everywhere else, they're going to come spend money at your establishments, and you might actually have a pretty like flourishing business over the next few years if this thing really takes off. And you could tell like the wheels started spinning and she started connecting the dots. But that was like my first, because I grew up in British Columbia, but then I got in oil and gas when I was 18 in Alberta. And everyone in Alberta, for the most part, is like pro oil and gas. But to like have to go through that really iterative step of
Yeah.
educating someone who has no knowledge of the energy industry was like, oh wow, I'm going to be telling this story a lot, it sounds like. So again, just as an
Yeah.
example,
Well, and I think maybe on a more overarching level, one of the things I think out of what really makes, or realistically, I think just one of the biggest things is we have so many voices also telling us we all think we're all on one end of the spectrum or the other. I'm from, so I live here in Houston. I, I believe in climate change, but I'm from Northeast Ohio, the cornfields south of Cleveland, son of a pumper. And so we get back home to visit my family semi regularly. And I think, in general, I find that most things I think may not be exactly the same as people in the middle of America. But when I talk to people who don't know anything about energy or don't know anything about what we do, there tends to be a middle ground and common sense we can all meet.
yeah,
When you listen to the news, you'd think I can't go to, like, or I guess a guy who lives in Texas can't go to somebody in Colorado and kind of have a good conversation and meet in the middle. When in
yeah,
reality, most people can. We see common sense, and I think one of your big points is reducing what we use is is just one of the easiest points. To to turn a long story to a long story. Um, I actually was visiting some friends in LA, and we ended. It was just before Labor Day. It was one of the last days you can. There's like a short period of the year, just the summertime, where you can kayak a couple different segments of the Los Angeles River. And
oh
so
okay,
it's a very urban segment. Like it's a super interesting, like kind of mixed uh, natural setting with a lot of like all the trappings of LA, plus all the trash we dump everywhere. It's it's the
Oh,
kind of thing that everybody should have to do to see how much plastic bags are ruining our world. Um,
geez.
but I get done with the tour and you kind of paddle upriver, and then you just come back at your own pace. And I'm like talking with the guide, and he's like, "Well, where are you here from?" And I'm like, "Oh, Houston." He's like, "Well, what do you do?" I'm like, "Here we go. I'm about to
Yeah.
talk with a guide in LA about how I work in oil and gas, and let's go."
Yeah.
I'm like, I work in oil and gas, and he's like, "Man, we got talking about energy," and he's like, we kind of met at that same common sense level. He's like, we still need hydrocarbons, but we need to use less. In general, we just need to use less. And it was like, man, I just talk with someone and we can find common ground on this.
Hmm.
It's not that hard. And I think making the steps common sense as well, instead of like,
Yeah.
well, we're gonna jump from point A to point B, or maybe point A to point Z. Talking about how we go to A to B to C to D. Maybe at D we need to skip to G because F, E, and F are kind of, we need to skip those. That's I think that's the way you really get people involved and interested in, or seeing that the energy transition is something that doesn't have to be earth shattering. It doesn't have to be, in my opinion, the way it played out in Europe. You don't have to go to $40 power.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's you're right. And I would say that most people that I've spoken with, and when I was doing my master's, I had folks from solar, as you said, LA. One of my, I would consider him a really close friend now after going through grad school with him. He lives just north of downtown LA. He works for the Los Angeles Utility Department. And again, most people who have, again, a degree of open-mindedness, who don't just read headlines and draw conclusions, like they actually do a little bit of digging and try to understand both sides before drawing any strong conclusions or any dogmatic,
Yeah,
ways of viewing energy. um a lot of people have there's a lot you again, you can find some common ground. And so again, I think conversations like this, and just everyone you meet, um just approach them with some empathy, and because they might have been drilled and burned in their skulls that big bad oil is just going to ruin the earth and everything else. And again, you have to be okay with that, and then just ask the right questions instead of telling people things. Ask better questions because I think
yeah,
it actually goes a long ways. So,
yeah.
but Josh, we're coming up on the hour here. I feel like we could probably keep going for another hour. We'll definitely have to do a round two, I feel like.
I love it. Let's do it.
Um, but real quick, if folks are interested either on finding more resources on the Uinta Basin, or if people are interested in XCL, they want to learn more about the story, where can we find you guys? And what I'll do is I'll put the link in the show notes so you don't have to spell it out.
Yeah.
But just in
Yep.
general, where can we find information?
Man, at Google XCL Resources, we're XCL the letters. You might end up with XL Energy. Occasionally, people
Yeah,
think we're
yeah,
XTO if we don't enunciate the letters well enough.
sure.
But our website's got great information about everything we're doing in the Uinta Basin. And honestly, huge plug to the Utah Geologic Survey. They have so much great info out there on all the things that are going on in Utah on a lot of fronts. They work a lot with the Forge Project. They're doing all kinds of things there. But for the Uinta Basin, they're great too. Man, heck, hit me up on LinkedIn if you love the Uinta. Let me know. I'll steer you straight.
Awesome. No, you're obviously a specialist in that field. So, appreciate you coming on, Josh. And for everyone out there, really appreciate the support. Make sure you subscribe if you haven't yet. Share this with someone who might find the story interesting. And always make sure that we're approaching the energy landscape with a radically open mind. Be kind, and always remember that everyone deserves access to energy, and we is greater than me. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, JG.